I want to think with you about a familiar but also highly puzzling phenomenon, what it is to love and value another person. Okay. Now, this discussion must also include those factors that present as obstacles to the task. Among them are not only factors that obscure the meaning of love, but that obscure the meaning of the person. Technological mediation, mediating the world, let's say, through a technological lens, tends to obscure interpersonal exchange. A technologically mediated world is very often a depersonalized world, one which eliminates the personal and the value of the personal from the person, or the ways people are represented. But just what is this personal dimension and how can it come to be known? According to the philosophy of Max Scheler, there's a particular connection between love and persons, between acts of loving and access to the deeply personal. One of the defining hallmarks of Scheler's philosophy is its underlying claim that love is a form of experiencing that is capable of disclosing value, specifically the value of a person. Okay, so love is a form of experiencing capable of disclosing value. He writes in his book, The Nature of Sympathy, it is characteristic of personal individuality that we only become acquainted with it in and through the act of loving, and that one's value as an individual is likewise only disclosed in the course of this act. But what exactly do we value about a person in an act of loving? What is one's value as an individual? So I'm going to survey a few options, let's say, a few positions with respect to this question of what love values. And first one I'll refer to here as metaphysical option A. Loving another is to value them as an instance of a general type or kind of the being. In this scenario, insofar as I value the type or the kind, I value any member of the type or kind. For example, if I value humankind, then I value any instance of humankind as instance. Okay. Now, there's an apparent universality and inclusivity to this kind of radical inclusivity, really, to this option that gives it strength. But supporters of this view tend to ironically focus perhaps on exclusive criteria. So I want to consider a passage from Seneca, from his letters of Lucilius. And he writes, this is everyone, if you come across a man who is not alarmed by dangers, not touched by passionate longing, happy in adversity, calm in the midst of a storm, is it not likely that a feeling of awe will find its way into your heart? Praise in him what can neither be given nor snatched away, what is peculiarly human. What is that, you ask? It is his soul, and reason perfected in the soul. The human being is a rational animal. Now, there are at least two problems here that I want to point out. First, Seneca takes distinguishing characteristics, things like being unalarmed, dispassionate, tranquil, and calm, to be communicable characteristics, common element characteristics. He employs criteria of differentiation as criteria for classification, to classify the type. In this sense, it seems there's a kind of exclusivity here rather than an inclusivity. Second, he relies on the value of those distinguishing characteristics to establish some value of the type, making it a bit prescriptive rather than descriptive. Now, since distinguishing characteristics are used to define a type, then certain instances of the type, those who better represent the characteristics, are considered as more fitting of the type. Now, there are many theorists now who agree that this can be a very precarious line of reasoning, where it easily leads to a dehumanizing conclusion, namely that those individuals who are considered deficient in the characteristics are, in this case, deficiently rational, are thereby deficiently human, more or less human. So this has been a source of human devaluation, social discrimination, as we know, for millennia. But if the relevant content for valuation then are simply the characteristics, then let's talk about the characteristics independent of talking about the general type. And so this pushes us toward a second option. Loving another is to value them as bearer of valuable characteristics. So as we're going through these, think about which one you think seems to be most fitting in your own assessment of this. So in this scenario, insofar as I value the characteristics, I value any bearer of the characteristics. For example, if I value kindness, then I value those who are kind. The benefit here of this view is that it better accounts for valuing a person as an individual with respect to distinguishing aspects, more or less defining of the individual person. But here's I think the important question here, do our characteristics go to the heart of who we are? Blaise Pascal does not think so. Here he writes in his Pensées in the 1650s, does he who loves someone on account of beauty really love that person? No. For the smallpox, which will kill beauty without killing the person, hopefully, will cause him to love her no more. And if one loves me for my judgment, memory, he does not love me, for I can lose these qualities without losing myself. Where then is the ego, the individual self, if it be neither in the body nor in the soul? And how love the body or the soul, except for the qualities which do not constitute me, since they are perishable? For it is impossible and would be unjust to love the soul of a person in the abstract and whatever qualities might be therein. We never then love a person, but only qualities. So Pascal here makes two claims. On the one hand, that an individual is ultimately more than her qualities. He says, I can lose my qualities without losing myself. Second, we can never love the person herself, only her qualities. Now, I wonder whether valuing qualities doesn't require first valuing the person. A common narrative suggests that we value people who possess traits that we value. Okay? So think about that. Do we value certain people because they possess traits we value? The story may be true derivatively, but maybe not originally. Originally, maybe the reverse is true, that we value the traits possessed by people we value. If so, then it's due to interaction with kind people that leads me to value kindness as a quality. So let's give this some consideration. A centerpiece of phenomenological theories of perception is that perceptual wholes, so integral, meaningful unities, essences, provide the condition for observational selection of their component parts. So I'm first given, let's say, a holistic or broad intuitive sense of a room, for example. You walk into a room that you've never been in before, right? You have some sort of sense about that room. Maybe it's creepy, or it's lovely, it's beautiful. But I may have this intuitive sense before I can empirically isolate specific properties and characteristics of the room that are contributing to why I'm getting that sense. That makes sense? That makes sense. Right? I think this pertains to people as well. As a child, your mother is first just mom, holistically. An awareness of who mom is in terms of her specific characteristics emerges gradually and continues perhaps indefinitely through a child's lifetime. But a child's understanding of mom does not grow only in proportion to their apprehension of specific characteristics. In fact, in listing mom's qualities, you may have to put forth additional mental effort to articulate what it is about mom that I value and that I admire, and also how you are to name, to describe, and conceptually represent them in order to best represent mom. Mom seems to be something that comes first, and then we later on describe mom in some sort of way. Why is that? So it seems like that there's an admiration of a person that does not presuppose first representing their characteristics. Rather, their representation presupposes the admiration of the individual person. So maybe then this leads us beyond both the metaphysical option and the empirical option to what I will call personalist option C. Loving another is to value them as an individual on account of the value of their individuality. Now, this is the option that Scheler will defend. It's typically avoided because, insofar as it aims at something independent from one's characteristics, it seems either to aim away from content that is personally significant, or at worst, it aims at nothing at all. Right? What is that which is dependent of one's characteristics? However, we commonly speak of a deepening of love, where a love that remains attached solely to characteristics seems indicative of a love that has not sufficiently deepened. It seems akin to a kind of shallowness that is not in keeping with what we mean by love, and upon which we honor or wish to honor those who are capable of great love, exceptional love. All right, now a couple quotes I'm going to go through. Actually, these are not from Scheler himself. These are from a couple of other guys. The first, 1972, comes from a passage from Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And he writes that an adult may come to love another because of others' characteristics, but it's the other person and not the characteristics that is loved. The love is not transferable to someone else with the same characteristics. And the love endures through changes of the characteristics that gave rise to it. One loves that particular person one encounters. Okay? Second, a couple of years later, philosopher Ken Henley, in an article called The Value of Individuals, writes that even though we usually care for an individual human being partly because of characteristics which others could also possess, we would in at least some cases deny that caring for that individual consisted just in valuing those characteristics. Sometimes we value the individual as an individual. We would not accept as a replacement even an exact duplicate. Say if someone is cloned, you happen to know that that was the case, they'd be the same person even if they had the same characteristics. Now, according to Nozick, then, the love of a person is non-transferable. It's that is to other persons. According to Henley, the valuing of an individual recognizes them as irreplaceable. The love of a person, perhaps, then, is non-transferable because she is of irreplaceable value. So what does love value, according to this view? Love aims at the uniqueness of a thing. It attaches to that which makes it distinct from the rest of its kind. In the case of persons, perhaps love values the irreplaceable value of their individuality. All right, now the value of love. Something like this. Love provides the condition that makes the recognition of the value of personal individuality possible. According to Scheler, in fact, as we mentioned from the last quote, or the opening quote. And if we grant social significance to this recognition, then love has this social significance. According to Scheler, love is, again, this condition for the recognition. Irreplaceability was arguably the most important theme running through the work of Fred Rogers, who wrote in his book, You Are Special, 1981, as human beings, our job in life is to help people realize how rare and valuable each one of us really is. That each of us has something no one else has or ever will have, something inside that is unique for all time. It's our job to encourage each other to discover the uniqueness and provide ways of developing its expression. However, there are others who, while recognizing the irreplaceable value of certain historical objects or artistic objects, seem not to recognize this about people. Contrast this Rogers quote with one from Sir Harold Nicolson. He's a British Parliament member, writer in the early and mid 20th century. He wrote, actually, so this is in the 44, so this is during the Second World War. And he writes these marginal comments, a marginal comment in a variety of editions of volumes of The Spectator. And he wrote that I should assuredly be prepared to be shot against a wall if I were certain that by such a sacrifice I could preserve the Giotto frescoes. Nor should I hesitate for an instant to save St. Mark's, even if I were aware that by doing so, I should bring death to my sons. My attitude, he continues, would be governed by a principle which is surely incontrovertible. The irreplaceable is more important than the replaceable, and the loss of even the most valued human life is ultimately less disastrous than the loss of something which no circumstances can ever be created again. All right. So the ethical problems here pertain to two forms of depersonalization, I think. The first is the one that comes from Immanuel Kant. And he would likely say that Nicholson is advocating treating himself and his children merely as a means for the sake of some external beneficial end. This violates the worth of a person as an end in oneself. The other is different. It's Scheler's problem, one that comes from Scheler. And he'll suggest here that Nicholson advocates treating himself and his children without any morally significant difference from other members of the human race. Their value is merely as instances of human nature among other human beings who are strictly identical in value and therefore replaceable. There's more context, by the way, here to the Nicholson quote. And if anyone's interested, we can discuss that in later outside of the context of the talk. So for Scheler, this violates the worth of the person as irreplaceable, or in terms of one's value as an individual. Now, of the two times that Scheler mentions depersonalization, one of the times is used to make precisely this point. It is depersonalizing, Scheler claims, when that which is called person refers to something that, quote, must be attributed to concrete persons, indeed to all human beings, in the same way and as something identical in all human beings. Scheler's personalism hinges here on an unusual claim. But the one I think becomes evident by those who maybe agree that there's some kind of devaluation in Nicholson's remarks about himself and his children. And that claim is that individual persons are not completely defined by their humanity. That's kind of an unusual claim. In some mysterious sense, we stand irreducible to our species being and to the characteristics that comprise our common nature. Or, in other words, we can say everything there is to say about human nature and still not say everything there is to say about human persons and about defining elements of human persons. This is what Scheler, I think, tries to capture by his notion of the personal and his notion of spiritual individuality. Now, on the one hand, the human spirit is phenomenologically reducible to nothing, it seems Scheler's kind of claims will take us. Maybe infinite persons are ultimately derived from an infinite person, God, but that's a metaphysical matter beyond phenomenological investigation, strictly speaking. On the other hand, as subjects in society, we each seem to be reduced to everything. All right, so take this as a contrast. Seems what Scheler is saying is that the human person is reducible to nothing, and yet we seem to be reduced to everything. We exist, let's say, for others as fully reducible to various social identities, our race, sex, gender, class, job, nationality, ethnicity, citizenship, religious profession, political affiliation, education level, etc., etc., etc. And this is by no means, not even close to an exhaustive list of forms of potential value reduction and depersonalization. We are all very well aware of this phenomenon, and that it can reach an extraordinary height of triviality, on one hand, coupled by an extraordinary height of hostility. Both an extraordinary triviality and an extraordinary hostility. In fact, this prevalent tendency to define one another had led Jean-Paul Sartre to exclaim, "Hell is other people." And that was before the internet and social media. Now, I have a growing concern that depersonalization is exacerbated in the technological mediation of an online atmosphere. I personally use social media to interact with people I know or have known in some kind of offline context. But that's not how everyone uses it. And I'd like to have us consider, for example, just what are the possibilities of who I can be for another and who another can be for me in an exclusively online context without looking upon a face, for example. Is it possible in that context that we can be for each other irreplaceable individual persons? Online trends tend toward labeling and, of course, moral pigeonholing. Entire swaths of the population are considered as all the same because maybe within that environment, they are all the same. They can't be anything other than all the same. It's one thing, though, to reduce another to some social identity, and it's another thing to reduce them to a kind of position of disvalue. I think this is where we finally get something of a kind of more extreme form of devaluation. At this point, we reach quite a deeper degree in a kind of hatred. Now, Scheler's theory of hatred is complex, and it connects up sort of correlate to his theory of love. But in hate is an ultimate value reduction for Scheler. The entire value of the person and the value of the entire person is reduced to the negative value they seem to bear. The more perfect the hatred, the more completely the object of hatred becomes identified with some evil to be overcome or destroyed. In other words, your hatred is incapable of seeing another as anything other than pure evil. So now on a maybe on an up note, I'll conclude with two passages from the closing sections of Scheler's Formalism and Ethics. No matter how rich and diverse the memberships through which each person is enmeshed in the whole of the moral cosmos, and no matter how diverse the directions of the various kinds of co-responsibility by which the person is tied to this whole, the person is never exhausted by these kinds of membership. For behind all experience, there enters into these memberships, everyone feels in some measure a peculiar self-being, which towers above the whole and in which he knows himself alone. What social perspective, though, follows from this feeling of absolute intimacy? There arises for Scheler a kind of imperative, a categorical imperative, I suppose, if you will, to approach another as always and inevitably more than what you think of them. Everyone is always and inevitably more than what you think of them. To withhold the ultimate moral assessment of the other is the duty of all finite persons. Any such ultimate assessment implies at once a violation of the other person and an evil act. Seems to me that this is the sense of judge not, lest ye be judged. If you would like to learn more about Scheler's thoughts, this book came out last year. I edited it with a friend and colleague of mine, Ed Hackett, Legacies of Max Scheler, a collection of 14 scholarly articles on Scheler's ethics, personalism, metaphysics, and philosophical anthropology. My own chapter develops and goes into some detail of some of the content here, and it's only $35, which is not bad for an academic text, which is sometimes up in the upper echelons of near 100. So thank you very much.